I think that something like people think resilience is to never feel the ups and downs. I think, yes, you totally feel the ups and downs. Building resilient skills is to then know how to deal with it. You still live through it. It may hurt the same, but the lessons you take from it become different ones. Back when I was in my corporate job before I started the business, I went through a phase of burnout. And what I learned in the recovery from the burnout phase was that I had not honored my values because of what the job expected and what needed to be done and all the time pressure and all of that. There's a lot of violating my values. So if I would have looked at how I was performing in the job and how much of that was me, there was a big disconnect. From my own personal experience and also what I've seen with clients when they become more happy or more consistently happy is when you know what those values are and then have a really honest look about what's the environment that you're in and how much of the values can you stay true to and how much do you have to compromise. But I think what the defining of your values and what is really meaningful and important to you, what that does, it gives you that foundation.
All right, Nicole Schaefer, welcome to The Competent Man.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to be able to have you and to speak with you. And I think one of the places I actually wanted to start was to address something that one of the first concerns, let's say, that you brought towards me when we originally kind of talked about the concept for doing this, which was the competent man, right? Mm-hmm. So what was, let's say, your hesitation or your question around the competent man?
So I think where my thinking went first was there is a bit of a movement that has started lately, which is around being man-specific. So I think for a long time we've known that there's initiatives addressing specifically women. And there is something now that seems to be emerging that is specifically for men, whether it's not gender mixed and it's specifically so men can be real and men feel safe and men feel not judged. And also, and I think it's like, to me, it's a full-on parallel. There's a lot of things where women say, women just understand me better. There's a few concepts about how women think and how our brains work. And I know that there's now more and more initiatives, also like weekends, workshops, that are specifically targeted at men. And what they may be missing in the general societal conversation, where they feel like they're maybe not seen, or they have to be someone that they actually don't want to be, or maybe they have to tiptoe around certain issues where it would be just feel freeing if they could not tiptoe around. And a while ago, I worked actually with a couple, so I did couples coaching. And between the two of them, they talked a lot about male and female energy and male and female preferences. And how, I think for the longest time, we've talked about, as a society, about women taking on more man energy. But there seems to be a desire, really, from the male population to have something that's specifically for them. And that is like being seen, being heard, and not have to sugarcoat or not have to play a role or not have to conform to anything. And there's now, like, as I say, weekends where men get to be like building fires and being out in the woods, and like what happens in the woods stays in the woods. And so in a way, I think all of that came to my mind about, the sensitivities, or maybe not sensitivities, around different genders and the desires, how we want to have conversation, how we want to meet, how we want to be with each other. So I think that's all of the background stuff that came up for me when I heard the competent man. And then I thought, like, well, I'm not that gender, so how do I fit into the whole fold?
Yeah. Exactly. So the idea, as I explained it to you, is not to necessarily be exclusionary, right? I very much think that we should be addressing how people feel and, let's say, these gender norms or roles within society. And my belief is that men and women are very good at very different things. And I think the idea of not acknowledging that is kind of silly in my opinion. But going back, it's not necessarily just to be exclusionary. That's a name that kind of like came to me and that ended up sticking. So you teach leadership through, in some ways, a lens of or with the aid of horses. So tell me a little bit about why you, or how you came to, let's say, see leadership and what you think the horses add to being able to teach some of these skills.
Mm-hmm. So how I came to think about this concept of working with people to build leadership skills is that I've had my fair share of experiencing in my professional past life, in my corporate life, poor leadership. What I mean by that is not putting the people first, but the output or the outcome. And then the people have to somehow conform to that or to somehow manage to perform according to certain expectations. And I've also witnessed what it does to people, like how it is confidence crushing, how some people need to go on stress leave because they can't deal with the stress and they can't deal with the constant pressure. And I think we've arrived at a view of leadership that is, in a way, it's cookie cutter. You always have to perform at your best every day of your life. Like, not every day of our life is the same. But we've started to experience or expect people to show up as the same. Like, I've gotten leadership advice from my leaders that said, you're never allowed to show emotions. Like, if you feel a certain way that day, you have to leave that all at home. And that's not us. That's not human, and it's not natural. So I think what ends up happening is that people believe they need to perform a certain way or behave a certain way, take on certain roles once they get into a leadership position, and they cease to be who they are. Or they feel like they don't no longer have permission to be who they are because there's all these expectations and all these norms that now somehow got defined by somebody, and that people now feel like they have to live up to. And it's not leading to good outcomes. It's not good for the people that are in the leadership position because they feel like they constantly have to play a role and they can't show up as they are. And it's not good for the people in their team because they feel now they have to perform because their leader is performing. So now they have to perform. And I think what we've lost over the years is to be human first, and care for each other, and connect on the human level, and not on any performance or product or project level. And as I say, like, I've seen all the negative consequences of that. And then I tried for a while to change it from within. And from within, I didn't get very far. So I decided, okay, maybe I can change it a little bit more from the outside. And then how the horses come in is a horse does not react to any performance. You can't pretend with a horse.
I was going to say, the way you explained it to me is you can't bullshit the horse.
Yeah, no, you can't.
Yeah.
So, if you show up and, you think you have to show up as the confident leader who knows it all, but internally, you actually feel a little uncertain. This is maybe a situation that you haven't been in. The horse reacts to who you truly are within yourself, not to the role that you play. In fact, they call you out on when you're pretending. And so what I find that adds to any form of personal growth or leadership building and competence building is that the horse is connecting to who you truly are, allows you then to explore what shows up there. So it helps people to become more self-aware, more self-reflective. And I believe if you don't reflect and if you're not self-aware, there's no growth. So in order for you to learn and in order for you to change and take on new skills, you have to first know who you are, and then you can grow from there. And I find the horses are like phenomenal magicians in bringing out those inner knowings that we actually have. And I think that's also what makes us so special, because all of us have a little bit different insights, and different authenticities. So the horse helps people to reconnect to that. And then what it also does is, I think as a leader, if you long-term want to stay in a leadership position, the only way to do that and to be sustainable and stay healthy in that is to lead from your core, from your values, from your principles, and from who you are. Because I think role-playing and pretending only goes so far, and then eventually it takes a toll on you. So I find the horses really help people just connect with who they are and then learn and build skills from there.
An interesting concept that I've, let's say, become aware of recently was brought up by Simon Sinek, I believe his name, on a podcast. And he was talking about basically, as I distill it down, this idea of me first leadership, right? It's the idea that leaders are meant to be the ones that go first. And, you brought up the idea of vulnerability. If, let's say, you're all working towards this particular end goal of a project, let's say, and you end up in this place where you have a leader that's just completely stoic and doesn't connect with the rest of the team, that might be, let's say, less optimal than having a leader that says, I'm really stressed about this deadline. And that kind of gives the space and the latitude to everybody else to say, oh, you know what? I'm actually pretty stressed out about this as well. And I think that's a really important idea of showing, let's say, vulnerability as a leader, but also creating that space to say, okay, everybody feels this way, and having the ability to, let's say, connect with your team or whoever that you're working with by acknowledging what everybody is actually feeling, instead of just being this kind of like detached, removed person that ends up being this, let's say, untouchable boss, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think what we've turned this concept of leadership into, and what I find is interesting is, like, there's meters among meters of leadership literature who all tell a different story, and then what you see in private or in practice actually transpiring is a very different story. And I think, like, that concept of admitting that, like, in a way, it's admitting that you're human. Like, just because I get promoted into a leadership role doesn't make me knowing it all, doesn't make me have experience that everybody else in my team has. And I think so what we've done is, this leader somehow is on a pedestal. One, it's quite lonely up there, because if you have to figure it out always by yourself, and if you are the one to know it all, it's not a good feeling, because you think, like, you got to live up to that when it's actually not natural to do that all the time. And I think we're also depriving ourselves of innovation and creativity, because my brain is only one brain. So if I now start to say to my team, you know what, I don't have the answer to this. Like, we're all challenged by this. I don't have the answer. Let's put our minds together. How about we all brainstorm? And I think we can only expect that from a leader to do if they feel safe to do it and if the team feels safe to do it. And it's that showing up first and foremost as who you are then creates this permission space for everybody else to say, whoa, so this person, my leader, has been showing some vulnerability, or that they're not knowing it all, or that they're a bit at a loss. This is a new challenge. What do we do? I have permission now to maybe speak up and say, I need help with this too. So, and then we start to open up about what we know and what we don't know. And then we can all grow together. And I fundamentally believe that this being in control and knowing it all really limits what we can achieve. And it limits our success rate too, because if I only work from my experience, well, that's by definition limited to my own experience. So, I may never come up with a really cool solution because I never opened up about not knowing.
Yeah, it ends up being you're the only voice and the only driver, instead of creating this, let's say, environment for other people to be able to contribute. And that kind of ties into this idea that you've spoken about leading from the front, the back, or the side. So why, what are the differences in leading from those different places?
Yeah, so what I see with the horses, for instance, and that is where the horses become really assistants and become quite visual for people to experience, is you can lead a horse from being in the front. So what I mean by that is you chart the direction. You set the direction and you say, we're going this direction, we turn around there, we're heading to this corner, whatever. So you are making the call. Leading from beside could look like walking alongside, literally, where you say, okay, team, like, what are your experiences? What can we do? How can we support each other? So you have way more of a collective team approach. And then the leading from behind could be where you say, okay, team, we need to go to this direction. Like, this is our North Star. I don't know. How about you all put your work together, your heads together, you all put your intelligence together, and you tell me, so I'm only telling you, this is the general direction, how exactly we need to go there. I let you lead that, and know that I'm in the background. I have your backs, I protect you. If we're failing or if something goes not the way we want it to, I'm there to have your backs. So there's different concepts where the leader doesn't have to be out front. And like a few years ago, I worked with a group of students, and we only had one horse experience for each of the student groups. So altogether it was 17 students, and they were all split up in groups of 3 or 4. And it was really sad for me to hear, because all those students, or the majority of them, believed that leading out front is the only way of leading, because that means you're the best, you've proven yourself, and in order to be really good and fulfill expectations, you have to be out front. And then typically what they would experience while working with a horse is, well, they started to put their individual wisdoms together and grew into a team approach. And all of a sudden the exercises became easier. And all of them were like super surprised how effective teamwork can be when you actually have a good way of communicating and you join together to achieve a certain task. And for each of them, it looked a little different. But all of them, like they just had the framework of these are the exercises to achieve. And then all of them had the freedom to find their own approaches. And so there was success stories in different approaches. But if I would have asked them in the beginning, does it have to look like? They would probably say, well, this is the ideal way. And then would have been boxed into only doing that way. And then by definition, cutting out all the other possibilities that are there. So yeah, I find it's like that concept that the leader has to be out front. It's a bit of an illusion, I think.
Yeah, I think this is something that's kind of come into view for myself recently, is this idea of, this individual attainment of goals, or individual leadership, or, all of these things of like, I'm going to achieve this. And I think a lot of that, while it can be very productive, and maybe you don't necessarily work well with other people to accomplish certain tasks, there's, I think, a big recognition that needs to happen as well within a lot of people that only individual focused attainment, I think misses one of the biggest points about, being able to have relationships, being able to build community, and having people to share that with. Like, I know for myself, the older I get, the more that I do, the more that I learn, the more that I want to be able to have people to share that with, to have these experiences with. And I think really the recognition of the value of having other people around you is a lot of, I think, what gets missed, and kind of what you're talking about in that.
Yeah, and I thought, like, especially with this experience with the students, I thought, like, how have we failed them if they are, like, at the end of their bachelor's degree, so they've finished post-secondary, and they still don't know that teamwork actually can be successful. I thought that was a bit soul crushing, honestly, because like, where can you in your future professional life succeed without a team around you? Like, there's always somehow a team involved, whether that is people that on whose shoulders you stand because they have charted some of your pathway and then you can take it from there, or whether it is that you have to work with it within those relationships. Like, I mean, maybe if you are a programmer of like very specific computer programs, maybe you can be on your own. But there's a lot of life out there that doesn't work when you're just on your own. So I find, that people can be in their mid-20s and still don't understand that actually there's a collective that provides so much more. And it's actually exciting because then, you can test and fail together and build together. So that concept of the leader has to be out front and the leader has to be the best and the strongest and the loudest, I think just deprives us of so many other possibilities. And that's again where horses come in, because this is like a non-human that people get to learn from. So you have to be open to understand that there can be learning from non-human beings.
Well, and that's exactly kind of where I wanted to go with this next. Like, why, if you know all of these lessons and you're teaching leadership, why do you need the horse to be a part of that? And, something you shared with me earlier today is, using language to basically translate this non-verbal or non-linguistic language to people or set of lessons is, I think, extremely an extremely interesting idea.
Yeah, I think what the horse does is the horse treads. Hey, this is perfect timing. What they're doing is they really allow people to connect with what truly shows up for them. So it's not that there can't be leadership coaching without horses. There's plenty of leadership coaches out there. Hi, hello. That that actually don't work with horses. Like in fact, I've done quite a bit of market research, and I don't know anybody else who involves horses the way I do, specifically for building leadership skills. And what it does for people is, one, it's that connection to themselves, because the horse mirrors so honestly back what shows up and how you show up. So you may have an idea of how you want to show up, how you want to be perceived by other people. Please don't throw this over. And because of societal conventions, we are not as candid as horses would be with us. Right. So, oh, great. Don't eat it, please. Like, no, don't eat it.
So for those that are only listening to this, we just had a horse interruption here because we're doing the interview in a field. So
yeah, and the horse thought the wind cover looked quite tasty. Yeah. So there's plenty of people that do leadership courses and leadership development without horses. Where I find they offer me a very special insight into working with people is that they just honestly mirror back. So if a person shows up where there's a lot going on in their personal life, like the performance side of leadership expects us to show up perfect every day. It's an illusion because it's just not how it happens and how it works. So likely if you have a lot of stuff going on in your personal life, you take some of that to your work situation. You carry some of that to your work relationships. And what the horse helps people to see is how much of that shows up. In a human-human connection, oh, now she's stealing your bag. In a human-human interaction, we may have that intuition, we may have that sense of, Tom's not the same today, like something is off about him. And then it really depends on our relationship and how much we feel comfortable being candid with each other. If I would actually say something about it, likely I would probably not say something about it. I would notice something And then it's like, yeah, the horse is like, no, you're off. And they don't let it go. Like their behavior does not change. She's eating your back. Their behavior does not change until something in you changes. So if you show up and you're really off and you're constantly in your head, the horse will mirror that you being in your head, you not being present, there's a lack of connection. The horse will mirror that. And they may walk away or they may not be able to connect that day. And they just stay candid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hi.
And whereas in a human-human interaction, we may sugarcoat over, we may not really talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I feel off with you because I sense something, but I never talk about it. Right. And you feel off because you sense I'm feeling off, and maybe I react somehow differently. And then what the horses do with their honest, candid feedback is they help bridge that so that people can understand how they want to be perceived and how they actually are perceived. And then once you have all of that information, you can actually start to talk about, now, do you want to change any of that? Like, is that what shows up? Is that what people mirror back to you? In this case, four-legged people, what they mirror back to you, is that comfortable? Is that how you want to be perceived? Or is there something that you really want to change? And if you now think about what could you change, how could that then impact your relationships? How could it impact your work environment? And then how does it translate from your work environment to your private environment? So what the horses are brilliant with is really reacting to your energy. Is there incongruence between who you portray to be versus who you are? And then also giving you feedback about how well do you communicate? How is your body language? How is your body language aligned or not aligned with what you actually try to achieve? So I've had people that didn't understand how their different energy levels really impacts how they actually get messages across and how well they can communicate, how well they may be able to delegate tasks and all of that in their work life. So this, like when the horse is being so candid mirrors, allows them to see really what's going on, to experience what's going on. And I think that's what sets this way of coaching with horses aside from other coaching, because you have really strong emotional experiences because they may reject a certain idea or not follow along, or they are super happy to just hang out with you. And then there's so many things, so many complexities with that, where we can dive deeper in coaching and say, okay, now that they're so comfortable with you, what does that tell you? Like, what's going on right now in you? What do you feel that you may want to take to your partnership or that you may want to take to your workplace? So it gets quite self-discovery like for people quite quickly, because these horses are just so honest about what they reflect back. And they don't come with an agenda. Like, I think oftentimes we as humans, we think like, he's hinting at something, he's not quite honest, maybe not all the cards are on the table. So we start to judge and assume. These horses just show up. They don't assume, they don't have an agenda, they don't want to like you or not like you, they don't want to listen or not listen to you. What they mirror back is, are you effective in communicating? Or are you kind of wishy-washy? Are you clear in your direction setting? Or are you like confusing? So and they don't come and show up like, I'm going to give him a hard time. They just show up honestly and candidly in the moment.
So, you just mentioned there this idea of, having, let's say, a plan or communicating properly. Are there, and I know it would be different for every single person, let's say, but, in general, are there several lessons that you kind of have to go over for everybody in this type of leadership training?
So in general, I think where I help people out with is horses don't use words. They communicate by subtle body movements, energy, spatial bubbles. So it's like where I help people is to understand, what is your spatial bubble? Like, what do you project? Oh, there's a fox. So what do you project? Is your energy by nature, like your default energy level, is that more a lower one or is it a higher one? Are you buzzing at a higher frequency or a lower frequency? So what people need to understand is, what is their body language like? For instance, if you want to take a horse forward, but your entire body language speaks like backwards or not so sure, the horse reads that. So no matter how much you encourage them by your words, they really read your body, because that is how they communicate. So the whole communication piece around energy and body language is important for people to understand. I think where that translates into human connection is that we read that too. Again, though, I think societal convention has taught us not to do too much of that. So we rely very much on our verbal communication, but it's the same thing. Like if our body language tells something different than our words do, or our energy, it tells us something different than the words do, people pick up on those incongruences as well. It's just the horses are more black and white and more like it's a starker experience for people. And then the other piece is like, because of horses being spatial animals in terms of like they move each other in the herd around in a spatial context, people need to understand like, how can I move a horse's hip, or how can I move a horse's shoulders out of my way or into my way? So those are like basic, let's say, ways of communication that I help people with. And then there's certain, I always start with a simple exercise where my clients take a horse for a walk. And then it builds from there. It depends on how well the communication is going, how well they connect. And then it just escalates from there. There's like turns and stops and starts that get involved. Sometimes obstacles get involved. Depending on how comfortable people are, I may involve more than one horse so they can experience different horse personalities. So that's where the individuality comes in. But it always starts out with just taking the horse for a walk and getting accustomed with each other. And then from there, we grow in complexity, let's say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you mostly work with two horses, like your two horses. And what do their, let's say, their different personalities, because I've heard you explain that one of them is a lot spicier than the other. So what do their different personalities have to do with, teaching those lessons as well?
Yeah. So they're quite different personalities. Like bottom line, you could probably explain that one is more an extrovert and the other one is more an introvert. More is a very social being. The other one is a little more aloof. And one is like very agreeable to a lot of suggestions, where the other one really likes things done her way and she kind of sets the context. So you could see how that just mirrors different personalities in teams. So the one may be, let's say the exercise is to go along the arena and then cross two poles. The one may be fine, just crisscross in close contact with the human. The other one being just more particular about her spatial needs. She may just stop until the human is at a distance that's the most comfortable to her. So what she teaches is not everything needs to be close contact and micromanaged. She's actually an excellent teacher for there's more than one solution. Whereas the other one is like super happy to be with people. What is interesting about that is that she is a very sensitive one to the energy field of people. So if someone shows up with a lot of angry energy or with a lot of fight and flight energy, this is a horse that would run away. Literally run away. And then she would stand at a distance until people regulate. And then once she feels the energy has come down to a more positive energy, then she joins again. So it's like the different personalities help people explore different aspects of themselves. And it also increases self-awareness for what's your comfort level as a default? Are you connecting easier to this type of personality or that type of personality? Now, we all know it's not that ideal. You can't get to build your team only with the people that you most like. You likely will be working in teams where there's personalities that you click with immediately and others where you have a little more difficult time to connect. And experiencing these horses helps people to explore those. Like, what are the defaults? What are the comfort zones? And where do they find they have a challenge? And then we can grow skills to help them with those challenges.
I find it interesting to, let's say, consider matching that energy or let's say the person you're going to be dealing with, or the horse in this example, obviously, that you're going to be dealing with, and kind of matching that energy, understanding, how they're feeling, and being able to really match or let's say match that communication style or the how they're feeling in the moment to be able to communicate most effectively. If somebody is super excited about something that they've just accomplished and there's something that they could have done better, in your opinion, maybe it's better to, match the energy of that excitement and give them the feedback that they're looking for without necessarily having to give them the negative side of the feedback in that moment when they're so elated and so happy about what they've just accomplished. And then give them that feedback maybe at a time afterwards, so that, you're still communicating both of those points of, like, I'm here to support you and I want to give you constructive feedback, but not necessarily having maybe the empathy in the moment and the understanding of that moment to properly communicate what needs to be communicated in the moment, rather than having to explain exactly how you're feeling completely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I've come up with the term energy amnesia, because I find that people don't know or don't understand lots about their energy levels, and also that they can access different levels of energy. So they may still be aware, or they may have some awareness about, my default is buzzy or bubbly or more calm and observing. Maybe they have that. But accessing different levels, like upping it or downing it, depending on who you're dealing with, is something that they often don't consider. It's not that they don't have it, it's just not a tool. It's that they usually play. And where the horses come in is helping them access those levels and then experience immediately, oh, if I'm getting more up in my energy, there's more buy-in. Or if I calm down my energy, there's a social joining, a community building aspect. And I've had clients that would share that after the coaching, being more aware of those energy levels, they now have more effective ways of communicating with their teammates. Exactly what you were just hinting at. It's like, oh, I'm getting better through because I'm paying more attention to their energy level, like my teammates' energy levels, and how I can actually tap into that and then get my message across in a smoother way. Yeah.
So do you think, let's say, maybe one of the most important lessons for leaders is to consider, maybe, is it being vulnerable or sharing vulnerability? Is it learning how to communicate more effectively through understanding those, let's say, the energy of the situation? Is there a handful of things that you would point to that you think make for a very effective leader?
I would say if there's one key thing, and then I think it kind of branches out like a tree from there, it's being authentic. It's not playing a role. And that the branches go in so many different levels then. So for instance, if I'm a leader who wants to have candid conversations in my team, yet I never share candid feedback, or I never show up candid and never say what I truly think about a situation. Like, you can say it's off the records, right? But if you never walk the walk, if you're only talking, that's not authentic. And it does not encourage your team. It doesn't create that permission space that then the team lives up to it. Like, I love things such as, I want this to be a psychologically safe space. Like, that's a buzzword right now everywhere. Yeah. So how do you create that? You don't create that by saying, I want you to feel psychologically safe. And then I never share a vulnerable situation for myself. I never share where I messed up. I never share where I made a failure. And, it got me into hot water. If I only say, please feel psychologically safe to share how you're feeling, and I never share how I feel, like, my behavior and how I show up and my habits speak so much louder than any words. And I think the other thing in terms of authenticity is, like, who says how exactly you have to fulfill your role? Sure, there's corporate cultures and there's expectations. But who says exactly how you have to be? So if you feel you want to work with your immediate team a certain way, and you feel like the corporate culture is maybe not in the majority that, how can you navigate that? But who says that you now have to become that other person that you're actually not, only to fulfill certain expectations? And I think that's where when people become less honest or less genuine and perform a certain way because they believe it's expected of them, and they're not living their own values, they're not living their principles, I think that's where it breaks down. So, yeah, and I think the third big piece to me is probably, and as I say, like, I find authenticity is the trunk, and then it branches out from there, because I think vulnerable is the same thing. It's like stepping out and saying, I don't know this, or I messed up, or I thought we'd be successful this way. Obviously we're not, and I'm sorry about that. I misjudged the situation, because that then allows other people to come forward and say, hey, you know what? I know I should know this, but actually I'm not certain. Can somebody help me? So I think if you want to create this culture of support and community where everybody pitches in and you support one another and build with each other instead of being in competition with each other, you can only do that if you as the leader live that. And back to what you shared, the leader first, I like the Simon Sinek quote that you brought. I think it's exactly that. You have to step into that space that you want to create for your team. And if you don't live that, don't expect people to just believe your words, I think.
Yeah, I think a big part of what you're just explaining as well comes down to having the humility to be able to admit that maybe you don't know something, or that and realizing that at the end of the day, it's probably going to be more beneficial to be honest and to reveal some of those vulnerabilities, or however you want to say it, that brings those people together, and you end up, let's say, forming or being able to have better relationships, and therefore I think that trust ends up building a more effective team in the end.
Yeah, I also think that there's this fear to look like you're not competent, you maybe don't have what it takes to be that leader. Like, it's all fear-based, right? That you may be seen as weak, or not knowing what you're doing, or not being able to give clear direction or send your team a certain way. And I think it's, if you would be able to let go of that fear for a moment and really connect on that human level, and be open and be honest and be vulnerable and say, I don't know certain things, or I come with a background of X, which is a certain background that got colored because of certain work experiences or cultural experiences or backgrounds or how you're being brought up and all of that. If you say, this is my experience, from my experience, I would go this route, but I'm open. Like, what does it sound to you like? If you want honest feedback where people say, no, I don't believe this is working because, if you want people to have the courage to speak up like that, you have to create that permission space. And you only create that if you show courage. And sometimes you say, I need to back off because I don't know what I'm doing.
So do you think that a lot of, these lessons and everything we're talking about applies as well to being a good, let's say, a good friend or a good partner?
I think so. Like the piece about the authenticity, I think is huge. I think like long-term relationships, they're not built on dominating or calling the shots. They're built on that trust and knowing that what you see is what you get. So there's an honesty and a transparency about it. And I think that is what we look for in friends and relationships and families, is to know who you're dealing with. And sometimes maybe that's not comfortable. Sometimes you may encounter something that, is a bit hard to swallow. Maybe there's an abrasiveness or a certain habit that is really hard to deal with. But you can only grow together if you discover those. So I think that honest look in the mirror, whether it's like to yourself or, how that gets reflected in a relationship, that's where you can then tackle it. But if I show up, like if I constantly swallow something, but I'm really irritated by a certain habit, like we never grow over that until we put it out on the table. So I think that authenticity piece of saying, I'm really cool with this, and this just brings up something, or it triggers something, or it really rubs me the wrong way, I think that's where we build and that's where we grow. Yeah.
So in some ways, that kind of brings us up this idea of building resilience. How do you think about exposing yourself or giving yourself the opportunity to, if you think about it as failure, if you think about it as challenges, like where do you in yourself or in your life try to set yourself up to build that resilience?
I mean, this sounds like a bit of a broken record now, but I think I come back to the values and the principles that I think are our core and what makes us up. So back when I was in my corporate job, before I started the business, I went through a phase of burnout. And what I learned in the recovery from the burnout phase was that I had not honored my values because of what the job expected and what needed to be done and all the time pressure and all of that. There's a lot of violating my values. So if I would have looked at how I was performing in the job and how much of that was me, there was a big disconnect. And I think from my own personal experience and also what I've seen with clients when they become more happy or more consistently happy, is when you know what those values are and then have a really honest look about what's the environment that you're in and how much of the values can you stay true to and how much do you have to compromise. And I think we always have to compromise. It's not about getting like really stuck in only living according to your values and never budging. But I think what the defining of your values and what is really meaningful and important to you, what that does, it gives you that foundation. So if you now encounter a situation that requires you to compromise, you can have a conversation with yourself about, is that too much of a compromise? Is that bending to break? Or is it just bending to amend to the situation in order to get somewhere? If you don't have the foundational knowledge about what are those values, you can't have that conversation with you. And what I find now is building a business is, it's lots of ups and downs and there's lots of roller coaster rides involved. And if something doesn't go that way, that's what I connect to. And it's not that I'm not miffed, or it's not that I'm maybe disappointed at times or feel like I have a blue day where I feel like it's really hard. But having that foundation of values and being aware of those then helps to say, okay, like what do I learn from this? What is still true? about me, and that's like the values and principles. And then how can I now learn, take the learning from here, reconnect with what those values really mean to me and how I want to be and how I want to act, and then combine the two, and then I can grow from there. And I find it's like that. I think that's something like people think resilience is to never feel the ups and downs. I think, yes, you totally feel the ups and downs. Building resilient skills is to then know how to deal with it. You still live through it. It may hurt the same, but the lessons you take from it become different ones.
So can you give me an example of one of these, let's say, values that you were violating that kind of led to that burnout situation?
Yeah, so I think one of the deep values is to be kind. And yes, sometimes, you have to push through situations, but what I felt was where I had to compromise constantly was to ask people, and like it was the birthday of their son that Saturday. And because of, to me, no good requirements, I had to call people in away from their son's birthday on a Saturday for 2 hours of work that we could have cleared over the phone. But there was like people above me that said, no, people have to be presently here in person, where there's conflicts. And I wanted to just take everybody like a level down and say, okay, what are we trying to achieve together? But there's so much conflict and power struggles involved that were due to how the whole situation was set up. So conflict and power struggles were created from higher above. And it was like you just had to live with that power struggle. And then you could never be honest with each other. You didn't feel you could put the cards on the table and say, this is what I need, this is what you need, where do we find a compromise? Because everybody was guarded and everybody was like so in their own. And I don't want to be that way. And I don't want to live that way. I believe that if we can have honest conversations and connections with each other, we get so much farther. But I was like totally deprived of having those conversations, because it was like, no, you're the leader now. People have to adhere to you. Well, they never bought into how it was all set up in the first place. So what am I going to do other than living, like trying to tinker around the edges of conflict? And I was never allowed to resolve the conflict by bringing people together and having honest conversations. And then, yeah, like being disrespectful to people's personalities and people's times, that was just really hard.
So, I think we can kind of separate being a leader 24/7, and as you said, I think, having particular values and really sticking to those values is something that is really important. But, there's so much of this, let's say, current culture that is so focused on being productive all the time, to always be on. Is being productive a waste of time?
I think we got some of the productivity concept really upside down. And this ties nicely to the resilience piece. When I was in this situation or in this work project that led to my burnout, it was constant go. There's no time to think. There was no time to pause. There was no time to reflect, because it was like a constant go. And every time there was 5 minutes, there was another email to send or something like that. Do I feel I was productive during that time? No, I was reactive, not productive. And I think we got so hung up on quantity, the hours we work, the pages we produce, the emails we write, the reports we put out there, and it's all about the number, that we lose sight of the quality and we lose sight of what's meaningful. And again, being a business owner, could I work 20 hours a day? Sure, I could. There's always stuff like that. That to-do list never ends, and it never gets all done. And what I found is that if you allow for time to recharge, which is maybe sitting in a horse pasture for an hour, or it is going for a walk. What I find like during my high stress job was it always felt like there's not the time for that. Like it's a luxury to go for an hour walk right now. It's a luxury to go out and see the horses. It's because there's so much else to do. And I think where I kidded myself and lied into my own pockets is it's not true. If I would have given myself every now and then that break, I would have been so more creative and so more productive. So I think where we have it upside down is that productivity is tied to numbers, not to quality. And I think if we would shift some of the numbers to pay attention to the quality and the intention, why we do and what we do something, I do believe we could be, like, we would achieve more in this initial sense of productivity, which is using time for something good, for something that increases value, whatever that value is, whether it's like making somebody else feel good, maybe it's volunteering, whatever that value is, but it's spending time in a valuable way as opposed to an output way.
And maybe even, being rested enough or being in the right mind state to be more efficient and more effective rather than, as you said, just trying to hit numbers all the time and you're running at a suboptimal level. Maybe you can get the same amount done as long as you're properly prepared to do it and in the right mind space to do it.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, like, I'm sure you would come up with lots of situations where you thought like you had to push through and just a little more, and then it took forever and the quality wasn't super great. Whereas you had other times where you just gave in on, you know what, I just can't. I need a break. I need to do something else now. And then the same thing takes half the time.
Or you come up with a different idea on how to do it. You and I were talking about having the ability to be bored and giving yourself this space to think about a problem, like let's say put a problem into your mind, and then not having all kinds of other distractions 24/7, just giving yourself the space and the time and maybe your subconscious time to actually process and come up with a solution for you instead of using your active mind to be constantly trying to push and push and push and push, letting that or making room for that space to come up with a better solution by getting quiet and being bored in some respects.
Yeah, and I think like there's actual science, like brain science, neuroscience, that proves that in order for our brain to work at its best, it needs those breaks. And I think you and I talked earlier about the concept of pausing. And I think that's another one where we got it a bit upside down, because pause to people seems like it was a waste of time. We could have done something with those 5 or 15 or 30 minutes. And then people think pause is empty. And I think pause is actually an enormously creative space, because if you allow your brain to wander, that's where creativity happens. That's where innovation happens. That's where ideas can form. And I mean, there's science that backs that up. Yet I remember during COVID time watching my husband, and he had like not even 5 minutes between Zoom meetings, and it was like all day, every day. Yet there's science that proves it's not productive. People don't listen to all the information that gets shared when it's back to back to back, because we can't. Like, we just can't compute that way. Like, computers are built very differently than our brains work. And I think we got hung up on the easy to measure, and we don't pay enough time to what's the quality that gets produced, what's the creativity, what's the thought process that leads to something.
So I give you only one question to kind of prepare for. So what does competence mean to you? And you can take that in any direction you want, whether that's competence in leadership, competence in life. How do you think about, let's say, the skill or the definition of competence?
Yeah, I thought about that quite a bit. to me, like the other word that came up and stuck in my mind for some reason is agency. So I think competence to me means agency. And then what I mean by agency is to know what I know and to know what I not know. So competence to me is feeling grounded in what I know. So if you want to think about that as like a horse pasture, feeling grounded within the fence and knowing there's an outside of the fence. And there's lots more to explore and there's lots more to know that I don't know. And feeling good about that. Like it doesn't give me anxiety to know that there's a lot of stuff that I don't know, because I think when it comes up and there's an opportunity to learn, competence to me, and that's the agency piece, means I can decide if I want to learn that or not. So it's like it's my own agency to decide what about all the stuff that I don't know do I want to explore, and how much of what I know am I comfortable with, and say, you know what, I'm good with that. I don't know, I don't need to pursue more about that. So
it almost sounds like you're building, a base of confidence from what you do know, and that gives you the ability to move forward into that unknown realm because you're rooted in that base.
Yeah, and I think knowing about that base also then gives you the confidence to know if you want to put your mind towards something, you can. And then that again builds then competence, because if you put your mind towards something and you dedicate time to learn something, then you become more competent in that field. So now I have agency to say, is this good enough? Or do I want to do more? Or do I want to take this in a different direction and build something new? Yeah.
So Nicole, what are you working on within the business? Any interesting ideas that you're actively trying to explore and expand into?
So I'm super excited. We are going to work with residents in pediatric medicine in the fall. So we are actually the very first program in Canada to do this. So we're quite proud of that. And it's really about helping people in the medical field build those interpersonal skills and the competence and the confidence to sometimes ask for help. Because I think it's one of those professions where there's a lot of peer pressure and a lot of social pressure to know everything and have every answer, which can be quite intimidating, and it can also get quite lonely. So what we're hoping to do is both build these interpersonal and leadership skills, and also build some community so that people feel they can and should uplift each other and support each other, as opposed to feeling like they're in competition with each other. So that's very exciting. We hope to grow this into more other areas of the medical field. So that would be super exciting. And then I'm going to start with a few individual clients. So I would just think what I would hope to build over the next year maybe is just have more people be aware of this, that this exists, and more people to see the benefit. I think coaching has a bit of the nuance that you seek it out when you're really stuck. And if I could put out an invitation, it's like, this could be awesome when you're super cool, like when everything is going so well, then coaching can, help you build on that super. It doesn't always have to be a low from which you see coaching, or where coaching can benefit. It's really, I often imagine if people are at their best, how awesome to put all of that positive energy into something yet more positive. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Not necessarily learning or seeking help when you're in a rough spot, but doing it from that place of confidence and having those tools when you get to that rough spot.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to adopt them when you have a lot of stuff on your plate.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Nicole, thank you so much. This was an excellent conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.